Be here. $50. That was all he had to spare. Enough for one modest meal, hopefully enough to impress the woman he was meeting on this blind date. His shirt was pressed but a little too worn at the cuffs. His shoes shined though the leather was cracked. Across the room, at a larger table draped in soft candlelight, sat Victor Albrecht, a billionaire CEO known for building an empire from nothing. To him, dinner here was routine. To Daniel, it was a leap of faith, a night where pride and hope balanced on a fragile budget. The woman finally arrived. Elegant, with eyes that carried warmth. Daniel stood, pulling out her chair with a smile that hid his nervousness. He prayed she wouldn't notice him hesitating when the waiter handed them the menus. She smiled, ordering lightly, almost as though she could sense the weight of his circumstances. From his table, Victor's sharp eyes observed something about Daniel's gestures, the way he leaned in to listen, the way his eyes softened when she laughed, stirred something deep within him. It wasn't pity. It was recognition. He remembered when he, too, had sat at a restaurant with nothing but a threadbare wallet and a dream, pretending the world wasn't stacked against him. Then it happened. The waiter returned, and Daniel discreetly counted his bills under the table, ensuring he wouldn't go $1 over. But when the check came, his face paled. Taxes had tipped the total just beyond what he carried. His hand trembled as he reached for his wallet, panic rising in his throat. Victor leaned back in his chair, his decision forming in silence as he signaled to the waiter. Without a word, he slipped his black card into the bill folder meant for Daniel's table. The waiter nodded subtly and walked away. Daniel blinked in confusion when the server returned, bowing slightly. "Your bill has been taken care of, sir." His date looked surprised, then intrigued. Daniel's chest tightened. He didn't understand. He hadn't asked for charity. His pride warred with relief, but before he could speak, a deep voice interrupted from behind. Victor stood, tall and commanding, his presence impossible to ignore. "Forgive me for intruding," he said, his tone calm but edged with authority. "I couldn't help but notice something tonight. You remind me of a younger version of myself." Daniel froze, caught between gratitude and embarrassment, unsure whether this was a blessing or a humiliation. His date stared, wide-eyed, sensing something extraordinary unfolding. Victor placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder, steady and deliberate. "Tell me," he continued, eyes locked with Daniel's, "what is it that you're fighting for so hard?" Daniel swallowed hard, his throat dry as he stared up at the man who could buy this entire restaurant 100 times over. His voice caught, then steadied. "My son," he said simply. The words carried more weight than any elaborate explanation ever could. Victor's sharp gaze softened. "How old?" "7," Daniel replied, his voice quieter now. "He deserves more than what I can give. I work double shifts at the garage, sometimes miss bedtime, but I'm trying." He paused, glancing at his date, suddenly self-conscious. "Tonight, I just wanted to feel normal. Like I could belong in a place like this, even if only for an evening." Victor studied him for a moment, the room falling into a hush around their corner. Conversations continued, but it felt as if the entire restaurant leaned closer to listen. His lips curled slightly, not in mockery, but in something resembling admiration. "You belong more than most people here," he murmured. Daniel blinked, unsure what to make of the words. His date placed a reassuring hand on his arm, whispering, "He's right." But Daniel's pride still bristled, his cheeks flushed with the fear of being seen as a charity case. Victor pulled out a chair and sat down without asking. His presence commanded the table, yet there was no malice in it. "Do you know why I paid your bill?" he asked, folding his hands on the tablecloth. Daniel hesitated, then shook his head. "Because you felt sorry for me?" Victor's eyes sharpened. "No. Pity is cheap. I don't waste my time on pity. I saw a man doing everything in his power to keep his dignity intact, even when life tries to strip it away. That I respect." The words sank deep into Daniel's chest, echoing in places he hadn't let anyone touch in years. His date looked at him with a newfound depth in her eyes, as if she, too, was seeing him for the first time. Victor leaned back, watching Daniel carefully. "Tell me something, Daniel. If you had more resources, more freedom, what would you do with it? What's the first thing that comes to your mind?" Daniel didn't have to think long. "I'd give my boy a real chance. Proper school. Maybe let him join the little league team he keeps talking about. He's bright, you know? Smarter than me by miles. He deserves the kind of life where he doesn't have to count every dollar or watch me come home too tired to smile. Victor's jaw tightened, the memories of his own childhood surfacing unbidden. Sleeping in the back of his father's car, wearing hand-me-down shoes too small for his feet, dreaming of something better while the world laughed at the idea. He saw himself reflected in Daniel's words, as though the universe had placed a mirror in front of him at this very table. The waitress returned to refill their glasses, her hands trembling slightly under the weight of the tension in the air. Victor dismissed her with a nod before turning back to Daniel. I built my empire from scraps, from nothing but the conviction that I refuse to stay small. The world doesn't hand opportunities to men like us, it forces us to claw for every inch. Daniel nodded slowly, his voice steady. And sometimes, the claws break. Victor's lips curved into the faintest smile, sharp but approving. Yes. But that's when you learn to fight differently. Daniel's date finally spoke, her voice gentle but resolute. Why are you telling him all this? Victor's gaze lingered on Daniel, ignoring her question. Because I've been looking for someone who still remembers what it's like to fight from the bottom. My boardroom is full of men who've forgotten hunger, who've forgotten fear. They make decisions blind to the people whose lives hang on them. I need someone who hasn't forgotten. Daniel's pulse quickened. He didn't know whether this was some kind of test, a cruel game, or the first page of a story he never imagined he'd be part of. I'm no executive, he said carefully. I fix cars. I survive. That's all I know. Victor's voice cut through his doubt. That's exactly why I'm sitting here. Survival breeds a clarity you can't learn in business school. You can teach a man to read a balance sheet. You cannot teach him grit. The words burned into Daniel, igniting something he thought had long been extinguished. For years, he had carried the quiet shame of being less money, less opportunity, less than the men who strutted through life with everything handed to them. But here was a man who had climbed higher than anyone, telling him that what he carried was not weakness but the rarest strength of all. His date's eyes glistened, though she stayed silent now, sensing the gravity of the moment. The restaurant noise dimmed, replaced by the thunder of Daniel's heartbeat in his ears. He wanted to speak, but words faltered. Victor rose slowly, placing a sleek black card on the table, not for the bill this time, but for Daniel himself. Call my office tomorrow morning. Ask for me directly. Don't waste this chance. Daniel stared at the card, afraid to touch it, afraid it might dissolve into smoke if he reached out. His hands hovered, then finally closed around it. He felt its smooth edges, its impossible reality. Victor leaned closer, his voice low, meant only for Daniel. You think tonight was about a blind date. But sometimes, the real encounter isn't the one you expected. With that, he straightened his suit jacket, gave a polite nod to Daniel's date, and walked away, leaving behind an air so heavy it was hard to breathe. Daniel sat frozen, his fingers gripping the card as if it were both salvation and burden. His date finally broke the silence, whispering, "Do you have any idea what just happened?" Daniel exhaled shakily, his mind a storm of disbelief. "No," he admitted, staring at the name embossed in gold on the card. "But I think my life just changed in a way I can't even begin to understand." The restaurant buzzed on, oblivious, but at that small table in the corner, the world had tilted on its axis. And Daniel, still clutching the weight of possibility, felt the first flicker of something he hadn't dared to feel in years: hope. Daniel couldn't sleep that night. He sat by the edge of his son's bed, watching the boy breathe softly in the glow of a dim night light shaped like a rocket ship. In his hands, he held the sleek black card Victor had given him. It was so simple, so small, yet it felt heavier than any burden he had ever carried. For years, he had lived paycheck to paycheck, measuring his worth in hours worked and meals skipped. But now, one gesture, one unexpected encounter, had cracked open a door he never imagined could exist. The next morning, his hands trembled as he dialed the number. He half expected no one to answer, or worse, to be told it was a mistake. But when the receptionist's voice said, "Mr. Albrecht has been expecting your call," Daniel nearly dropped the phone. Within hours, he found himself stepping into a world so far removed from his own that he felt like a trespasser. Polished marble floors gleamed under golden light, Suits worth more than his monthly rent strode past him. And yet, at the top of it all, stood Victor waiting. Victor didn't offer a handshake. He offered a challenge. "I don't give handouts," he said, his voice cutting through the silence of the office. "If you want this chance, you'll earn it. You'll sit in rooms where men will underestimate you, where they'll laugh at the grease under your nails and the roughness of your words. But if you stay true to what I saw last night, you'll outlast them all." The weeks that followed tested Daniel in ways he never thought possible. He learned about numbers, negotiations, strategies that made his head spin. He stayed late into the night, fueled by coffee and determination, then returned home to read his son bedtime stories with tired but hopeful eyes. And every time doubt crept in, he remembered Victor's words, "Grit cannot be taught." Slowly, Daniel found his footing. His ideas weren't polished, but they were real, born of a life that had seen struggle, sacrifice, and survival. While others in the boardroom spoke from theories and textbooks, Daniel spoke from experience. He saw opportunities in overlooked corners, solutions in the simplest places. To his surprise, people began to listen. Even the ones who once dismissed him started to nod when he spoke. His son noticed the change too. "Dad," he whispered one night, "you smile more now." And Daniel realized he did. It wasn't the smile of a man pretending to be fine, but of a man finally daring to believe he could be. Months turned into a year, and the man who once counted crumpled bills under a restaurant table now walked confidently into meetings where decisions moved millions. He was still Daniel, the single father, the man who loved his boy more than life itself, but he was also something more, proof that hope once lit can burn brighter than despair. The story spread quietly at first. Employees whispered about the mechanic who had somehow found his way into the highest ranks of one of the most powerful companies in the city. Rumors painted him as lucky, others as chosen. But those who knew his journey understood, it wasn't luck. It was courage, humility, and the kind of strength only hardship can forge. One evening, nearly 2 years after that blind date, Daniel returned to the same restaurant. This time, he didn't sit in the corner, nervous and uncertain. He sat at the center, his son beside him, now a little older, dressed in a neat button-down shirt Daniel could afford without hesitation. The waiters greeted him by name, and the world no longer felt like a place he was intruding upon. As they finished their meal, a couple across the room caught Daniel's eye. The man fumbled nervously with a worn wallet, his face pale as he stared at the check. The scene was painfully familiar. Daniel's heart tightened, recognizing himself from that night long ago. Without hesitation, he called the waiter and quietly slid his card into the folder. "Take care of it," he whispered. The couple's eyes widened when they learned their bill had been paid. The man looked around, confused, until his gaze landed on Daniel. Daniel offered a small, knowing smile, one filled with understanding and encouragement. His son tugged at his sleeve. "Dad, why did you do that?" Daniel looked down at him, eyes glistening. "Because someone once did it for me. And it changed everything." Across the restaurant, Victor watched from his usual table, a rare smile curving his lips. He had known Daniel would not only rise but would also remember. That was the difference between men who chased power and men who carried purpose. Daniel didn't become a millionaire overnight, nor did he forget the struggles that shaped him. What he became was something greater, a living reminder that sometimes the smallest kindness, offered at the right moment, can ignite a fire powerful enough to alter the course of a life. And so the story of the single father who once had only $50 for a blind date turned into a legend whispered through boardrooms, neighborhoods, and dinner tables alike. A story not of charity, but of faith, resilience, and the extraordinary truth that greatness often begins in the quietest acts of courage. Daniel's journey was far from over, but as he left the restaurant that night, his son's hand in his, he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He no longer lived in the shadow of survival. He lived in the light of possibility, a light he was determined to pass on to others, just as Victor had passed it on to him.